Imagine this. You've just played the biggest game of your life. You made one mistake, a split-second instinctive decision that went wrong. Not through laziness, not through recklessness, just bad luck. You fly home. You want to face your people, show your face, hold your head high. You go out with friends to clear your mind. And then, in a car park, in the early hours of the morning, your life is taken from you because of a football match. That is the true story of Andrés Escobar, and it is one of the darkest chapters this sport has ever seen. Before we get to 1994, you need to understand who Andrés Escobar actually was, because this story only hits the way it should when you know the kind of man we're talking about. Escobar grew up in Medellin, Colombia, a city that in the 1980s and early 1990s had become one of the most dangerous places on earth. Violence was everywhere. The homicide rate in Colombia at its peak was staggering. Medellin was the beating heart of the cocaine trade, and the men who ran that trade had their fingers in almost every corner of public life. But Andrés Escobar, no relation to the infamous Pablo, moved through all of that with a remarkable kind of grace. He was known throughout Colombian football as El Caballero del Fútbol, the gentleman of football. He never refused an autograph. He always wore a suit in public. He was humble, approachable, warm. He was the kind of footballer who made you proud to watch the game. On the pitch, he was a composed, intelligent central defender who played his club football for Atlético Nacional, Medellin's biggest club. He was captain of the national side. He helped Colombia qualify for 2 consecutive World Cups in 1990 and 1994. And heading into the summer of 1994, Colombia were not just participants at the World Cup in the United States, they were contenders. Here's where the story gets darker, and this is the context that most people skip over. Colombian football in the late 1980s and early 1990s was awash with money. Extraordinary, unexplainable money. The reason wasn't sponsorship deals or television rights. It was the cartels. Pablo Escobar, the drug lord, essentially called the shots at Atlético Nacional, the very club Andrés played for. The Cali Cartel ran America de Cali. Another cartel figure publicly owned Millonarios FC in Bogotá. These organizations poured millions into Colombian football clubs as a way of moving money around. And the results on the pitch were remarkable. Colombia won the Copa Libertadores in 1989. They were winning matches against world-class opposition. They beat Argentina 5-0 in Buenos Aires during qualifying, a result so shocking that Pelé himself named Colombia as one of his favorites to reach the semi-finals of the 1994 World Cup. But there was a shadow hanging over every match. The same men funding these clubs were placing enormous bets on their outcomes. And when results didn't go the way they expected, people faced consequences. In 1989, a referee who made decisions in a match between cartel-backed clubs was found outside his hotel, fatally confronted. The Italian FA called for Colombia to be removed from the 1990 World Cup entirely. The Colombian players heading to USA 94 were not just carrying the hopes of a football-mad nation. Some were receiving what were described as strong messages, essentially threats, from the criminal underworld, demanding results. Several had personal security assigned to them. At least one player's family member was targeted in the weeks before the tournament. This was the environment that Andrés Escobar was carrying into every game. Colombia's tournament began badly. They lost their opening game 3-1 to Romania. The pressure was immense. They needed a result against the United States, the host nation, in their second group game at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. June 22, 1994. 94,000 people in the stadium. 35th minute. The USA are on the attack. A ball comes in from the right, crossed low across the face of goal by American midfielder John Harkes, looking for a striker on the far post. Escobar, instinctively doing what every defender is trained to do, stretches out his left leg to cut it out. He makes contact. The ball deflects sharply, and it rolls impossibly into his own net. He lies on the ground, hands over his head, staring up at the sky. The stadium erupts around him, but not for Colombia. The USA won 2-1. Colombia were effectively out. Despite beating Switzerland in their final game, they went home in the group stage, one of international football's most shocking early exits. a team that had been tipped to challenge for the title, gone. Escobar gave an interview afterwards. He was calm, measured. "Life doesn't end here," he said. He spoke about accountability, about moving forward, about returning home and facing his people. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't fleeing. He decided he wanted to go straight back to Colombia and show his face.
"I want to go to Colombia,"
he told his family.
"I want to show people I'm not ashamed."
Escobar landed in Colombia to a country in grief and rage. The team had failed. The press was brutal. The Football Federation president called certain players unworthy of wearing the jersey. The atmosphere was volatile. Friends urged him to take up an offer to stay in Miami for a while. Let things settle. Wait for the anger to pass. He refused. He was, as those who knew him kept repeating, a man of genuine character who believed you faced things head-on. On July the 2nd, 1994, just 10 days after the match, Escobar went out for the evening with friends to a club in Medellin called El Indio. While there, people in the club called out to him about the own goal. He left. In the car park outside, he encountered a group connected to two brothers, figures in Medellin's criminal world, who had reportedly lost significant sums of money betting on Colombia's World Cup campaign. Words were exchanged. According to witnesses, one of the brothers said something to the effect of,
"You don't know who you're dealing with."
Moments later, one of the brothers' associates approached Escobar and ended his life. He was 27 years old. The assailant reportedly called out the word goal after each of the 6 times he acted, an echo of the commentator's call when the own goal went in. 120,000 people lined the streets of Medellin for Andrés Escobar's funeral. The man who directly carried out the attack, a driver named Humberto Muñoz Castro, was arrested and sentenced to 43 years. He was released after just 6 years for good behavior. The brothers suspected of ordering what happened, the Galán brothers, were charged only with obstruction of justice and spent 15 months in prison before being released. They denied involvement. For decades, many in Colombia believed true accountability had never been reached. It wasn't until 2026, over 30 years later, that the Colombian president announced that one of the key figures long suspected of being behind the attack had himself been found in Mexico, where he was confronted and killed. The story, in a grim way, was still not over. Andrés Escobar's father said it best, "Colombian justice for me is a deception, because it deceives the people and the family." Andrés Escobar was not a symbol of Colombian failure. He was a symbol of Colombian football at its best. Talented, dignified, honest. A man who scored an own goal because he was doing his job and paid an unthinkable price for it. His story is a reminder that football doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside the real world, with all its money, power, corruption, and consequence. And sometimes, the people who suffer most are the ones who least deserve it. There's a statue of him now in Medellin. Every year, fans still bring his photograph to Colombia's international matches. The gentleman of football was never forgotten. If you want to understand more about how the cartels shaped Colombian football and why the national team of the 1990s was unlike anything the world had ever seen, that story is coming next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.